Have you ever spent your entire life sacrificing everything for your family, only to discover that, in their eyes, you weren't a father anymore? You were just an obstacle, a signature, a house, an inheritance waiting to happen. Because that's exactly what happened to me, and by the time my own children realized the price of treating me like I was already dead, everything they thought was theirs belonged to someone else. Before we begin, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, if you've ever dreamed of seeing justice served without lifting a finger, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay until the end. Because today's story isn't just about revenge, it's about dignity, it's about respect, and it's about the day two ungrateful children learned that love can be unconditional. But inheritance never is. My name is Victor Harrison. I'm 66 years old. Most people my age spend their mornings fishing, spoiling grandchildren, or arguing with their spouses about what flowers belong in the garden. I spent mine wondering when my children had stopped seeing me as their father. I had lived in the same town my entire life. I knew nearly every street by memory. Every corner carried a piece of my past. I'd built a successful heating and cooling company from nothing more than one old service van, a worn-out toolbox, and a promise that I'd always show up when people needed me. 35 years of crawling through blazing attics in July and freezing basements in January had paid for everything my family ever had. Every birthday, every Christmas, every college tuition payment, every dream my children ever chased. My wife, Evelyn, stood beside me through every exhausting year. Together we built a beautiful craftsman home on Maple Ridge Drive. It wasn't a mansion, but every floorboard carried a memory. Our daughter Sophia took her first steps across the living room. Our son Ryan broke his arm falling out of the old maple tree in the backyard. Those walls had heard bedtime stories, birthday songs, laughter, arguments, and whispered promises between a husband and wife who believed family meant forever. I honestly believed my children loved that house as much as we did. I couldn't have been more wrong. Retirement gave me something I hadn't had in decades. Silence. Too much silence. When you're busy working 12-hour days, you don't notice who's drifting away. But when the phone stops ringing, you notice everything. Sophia never called unless she accidentally answered. Ryan's messages always started the same way. "Dad, can you help me with something?" It was never, "Dad, how are you?" Never, "Dad, do you want to have dinner?" Just favors. Money, signatures, advice they rarely followed. At first I convinced myself it was normal. Kids grow up, they build their own lives. Parents are supposed to let go. That's what I kept telling myself. Until one afternoon, everything changed. It began with the smallest phone call imaginable. 5 minutes. That was all I wanted. Evelyn and I had found a small lakeside cabin about an hour outside town. We thought maybe we'd spend summers there, fishing and watching sunsets together. I smiled as I dialed Sophia's number. 4 rings. Then she answered. "Dad, I'm working. I know, sweetheart. It'll only take a minute." A heavy sigh, the kind that makes you feel like you're interrupting someone far more important than yourself. "I really don't have time. It's just about the cabin." Another sigh. Then words I still hear every single night. "Dad, can you and Mom just stop calling us? Ryan and I already talked about it. We have our own lives now. You need to stay on your side, and let us live ours." For a moment I honestly thought I'd misheard her. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. The phone became strangely heavy in my hand. My heart wasn't racing. It wasn't even breaking yet. It simply stopped. "Stay on our side?" I whispered. "What does that even mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like." My fingers tightened around the phone. Across the room, sunlight poured through the kitchen window exactly as it had every afternoon for nearly 40 years. Nothing outside had changed. But inside, everything had. I sat there long after the call had ended. The phone rested on the kitchen table, but I couldn't bring myself to pick it up again. It felt poisonous, as if those few simple words had seeped into the walls of the house I'd spent 40 years building. "Stay on your side." The sentence echoed through my mind over and over again, not because it was loud, because it was final. There hadn't been any anger in Sophia's voice. No shouting, no argument, just cold certainty. That was what hurt the most. She hadn't spoken in frustration. She'd spoken from a decision already made. And somehow, my own son had been part of it. The back door creaked open. Evelyn stepped inside carrying a small basket filled with tomatoes she'd picked from the garden. She smiled when she saw me. The smile disappeared almost instantly. Victor? I didn't answer. I couldn't. She slowly set the basket on the counter. The smell of fresh soil still clung to her gardening gloves. She walked over and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. What happened? I swallowed hard. Sophia. The word barely escaped my mouth. What about her? I looked into my wife's eyes and said the sentence I never imagined saying aloud. They don't want us calling anymore. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The heavy kind that presses against your chest until breathing feels like work. What? She said she and Ryan already talked about it. Evelyn blinked. They discussed us? I nodded. Without either of us. For several seconds she didn't move. Then I watched heartbreak slowly transform into anger. Real anger. The protective kind only a mother can feel. So they held a meeting. She laughed once. A bitter, humorless laugh. And neither one of them thought their own parents deserved to be in it? I stared at the table. I kept asking what I'd done wrong. And I never got an answer. That night, neither of us slept much. The television stayed off. Dinner grew cold on our plates. The silence between us said everything words couldn't. Every memory felt different now. Every birthday, every Christmas morning, every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every school play I'd sat through after working 12-hour shifts. Had those moments mattered only to us, or had they simply faded from our children's memories? Around midnight, Evelyn finally spoke. Do you remember when I had surgery? I nodded immediately. 4 years earlier, she'd undergone a routine operation. Nothing life-threatening, but frightening enough. I remember calling both of them from the hospital. So do I. Sophia said she'd call later. She never did. And Ryan? I sighed. He sent one text. Hope Mom feels better. That was it. No visit. No phone call. No flowers. Just 12 words squeezed between whatever else seemed more important. At the time, I'd defended them. They're busy. They have careers. They'll come this weekend. Weekend after weekend passed. They never came. Looking back, the signs had always been there. Ryan only called when he needed help refinancing something. Sophia only visited during holidays, and even then she spent more time looking at her phone than talking to us. I hadn't noticed because fathers become experts at making excuses for their children. Every disappointment came wrapped inside another excuse. They're tired. They're stressed. They're young. Until one day, you realize you've spent years explaining away behavior that should never have happened. 3 mornings later, I walked outside wearing slippers to collect the mail. Bills, advertisements, a gardening catalog. Then I noticed a thick white envelope. A downtown law firm's return address was stamped neatly across the corner. Not my attorney, someone else's. A strange feeling settled into my stomach before I'd even opened it. Inside was one page. Cold. Professional. Precise. My eyes skimmed the first paragraph. Then the second. I read it again and again, each time hoping I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. My son, Ryan, had hired a lawyer to investigate what legal claim he might have to my house. Not after I died. Now, while I was still alive. While I was still living inside it. For several seconds the world simply stopped moving. The mailbox stood open. The morning breeze rustled the trees. Birds chirped somewhere down the street. But none of it reached me, because in that moment, I realized something that hurt even more than Sophia's phone call. My children weren't waiting to lose their parents. They were preparing to inherit us before we were even gone. I folded the letter carefully, walked back inside, placed it silently on the kitchen counter in front of Evelyn. She read every word, then looked up at me. Her face had gone completely still. They think we're already dead. I didn't answer, because for the first time in my life I was afraid she was right. The lawyer's letter sat on our kitchen table for the rest of the afternoon. Neither Evelyn nor I touched it again. We didn't need to. Its message had already carved itself into our hearts. My son hadn't called to ask how we were doing. He hadn't asked whether his mother and I needed anything. He hadn't asked if we'd thought about our future. Instead, he'd asked a lawyer how soon he could lay claim to the house we'd spent 40 years paying for. It wasn't grief I felt anymore. Grief still carries love. This was betrayal. That evening, Evelyn poured 2 cups of coffee and joined me on the back porch. The sun was disappearing behind the old maple tree Ryan had once climbed as a little boy. I remembered teaching him how to hammer nails into a birdhouse. I remembered him running toward me after Little League games. Dad, did you see my catch? Back then, I wasn't an obstacle. I was his hero. When had that little boy disappeared? When we were raising them, Evelyn said quietly, almost as if she were reading my thoughts. Did we make them feel like they deserved everything? I looked at her. I don't know. We gave them everything we could. We wanted them to have better lives. She stared into her coffee. Maybe we forgot to teach them gratitude. Neither of us spoke after that. Sometimes, silence tells the truth better than words. The next morning I walked into my home office. It was the smallest room in the house. Old photographs lined the shelves. Sophia holding her high school diploma. Ryan wearing his graduation cap. A family vacation at Yellowstone. Christmas mornings. Fishing trips. 40 years. Captured in frames. I looked around the room and realized something painful. Every picture showed what our family had been. None of them showed what it had become. I picked up the phone. For several minutes my thumb hovered over Ryan's number. Every instinct inside me wanted to call him. To ask him why. To beg him to tell me there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Maybe the lawyer had made a mistake. Maybe someone had exaggerated. Maybe my son was still the boy who once fell asleep on my shoulder during long drives home. But another voice spoke louder. The voice of reason. If Ryan truly believed I was nothing more than a future inheritance, he wouldn't tell me the truth. He'd tell me whatever protected his interests. Slowly, I lowered the phone. Instead of dialing my son, I called someone who had stood beside me through 30 years of business contracts, lawsuits, and negotiations. My attorney, Daniel Whitmore. He answered on the second ring. Victor? It's been a while. It has. Everything all right? I looked at the letter lying beside me. No, it isn't. An hour later I sat across from Daniel in his downtown office. The room smelled of leather-bound books and fresh coffee. He listened without interrupting as I told him everything. Sophia's phone call, the words she'd used, Ryan's lawyer, the inheritance letter. When I finally finished, Daniel folded his hands together. Do you want my honest opinion? I wouldn't have come here if I didn't. He nodded slowly. This wasn't curiosity, Victor, it wasn't? No. He tapped the letter with one finger. This is strategy. The word hit me harder than I expected. Strategy? Your son isn't wondering what happens someday. He's preparing for it now. My stomach tightened. Daniel continued. I've spent 30 years handling estate disputes. I've seen children pressure elderly parents. I've seen manipulation. I've seen guilt. I've seen families destroyed over property. Then he leaned forward. And I don't think this has even started yet. I felt the room grow strangely cold. So, what do I do? Daniel looked directly into my eyes. First, you do absolutely nothing. I frowned. What? You don't confront Ryan. You don't argue with Sophia. You don't warn them. Why not? Because right now they don't know you know. I blinked. They've shown their hand. Don't show yours. His words settled into my mind. Every instinct told me to fight, to call, to yell, to demand answers. But Daniel wasn't an emotional man. He dealt in facts. And if I confront them, they'll apologize. They'll cry. They'll invent explanations. And you'll forgive them. He paused. Then they'll continue exactly where they left off. I hated how believable that sounded. Daniel stood and walked toward his office window. Victor, I need to ask you one question. What outcome do you actually want? I didn't answer immediately, because until that moment, I hadn't allowed myself to think about it. Did I want revenge? Did I want reconciliation? Did I simply want my children to love me again? Minutes passed. Finally, I looked at the family photo sitting on Daniel's desk. Then I whispered the words that would change every remaining year of my life. I don't want them to think they're entitled to anything I've built. Daniel slowly nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. He opened a fresh folder, placed a blank legal pad on the table, picked up his pen. Then let's make sure they learn the difference between being your children and earning your legacy. I drove home from Daniel Whitmore's office in complete silence. The radio stayed off. The phone remained face down on the passenger seat. Outside, the city moved exactly as it always had. People hurried across intersections. Kids rode bicycles through quiet neighborhoods. Couples laughed on restaurant patios. Life kept moving. Mine had just changed forever. For the first time in my 66 years, I wasn't asking myself how to fix my family. I was asking whether it was worth fixing at all. That evening, Evelyn found me sitting alone on the back porch. She didn't ask where I'd been. After 40 years of marriage, she knew my face better than I knew it myself. "You talked to Daniel." "I did." She sat beside me. "And?" I stared across the backyard. "He thinks Ryan's already planning for our estate." She closed her eyes. "I was afraid you'd say that. He told me not to confront either of them." "Good." I looked at her. "You agree?" "Victor," she reached over and squeezed my hand. "If our children truly loved us, they wouldn't need a warning to act like family." Her words landed harder than anything Daniel had said. She was right. Love shouldn't require reminders. Respect shouldn't have to be negotiated. The next morning, Daniel invited us both to his office. When Evelyn and I arrived, 3 thick folders waited neatly arranged across the conference table. Daniel looked unusually serious. "What we're discussing today," he began, "will permanently change your family's future." He slid one folder toward me. "I've reviewed your estate." He opened another. "The house is completely paid off. No mortgage, no liens, no legal claims." He looked directly at us. "That means one thing. You own every brick. You decide who receives it. Not your children. Not a court. You." I nodded slowly. "I understand." "No," Daniel said quietly. "I need you to truly understand." He leaned forward. "If you choose another beneficiary, there is no obligation, legal or moral, to leave this house to your children." The room fell silent. I looked at Evelyn. She looked back at me. Neither of us said a word. Because, for the first time, we realized something we'd never allowed ourselves to consider. Our children weren't automatically entitled to the life we'd spent 40 years building. Daniel broke the silence. "So, is there anyone who has consistently shown kindness to both of you?" Immediately, one name entered my mind. Grace Bennett. Our former neighbor. A home health caregiver. A divorced mother. Not wealthy. Not powerful. Just kind. When Evelyn underwent hip surgery, Grace appeared every evening with homemade soup. When my blood pressure medication left me dizzy, she stopped by every morning before work just to make sure I hadn't fallen. During the worst winter storm our town had seen in years, when the power failed across half the county, Grace walked through snow carrying a battery lantern, hot coffee, and blankets. She never asked for money, never hinted about favors, never expected anything in return. She simply cared, sometimes more than our own children did. Daniel noticed my expression. "You're thinking of someone." I nodded. "Our old neighbor." He smiled faintly. "Tell me about her." For nearly 20 minutes, Evelyn and I told him story after story. The meals, the hospital visits, the phone calls, the quiet acts of kindness no one else noticed. When we finished, Daniel leaned back. "I've handled estate planning for 30 years. You know what I've learned?" "What?" "Family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's defined by who actually shows up." That sentence stayed with me. Who actually shows up? Ryan showed up when he needed signatures. Sophia showed up for Christmas dinner and left before dessert. Grace showed up when nobody was watching. Without cameras, without holidays, without expecting applause, just because someone needed help. The comparison became impossible to ignore. A week later, we invited Grace over for coffee. She smiled as she stepped onto our porch. "If this is about your porch railing again," she laughed, "I promise I already called the handyman." I smiled for the first time in days. "It isn't about the railing." Her smile faded as she noticed our expressions. "Is everything okay?" "No." I took a deep breath. Then I told her everything. Sophia's phone call, Ryan's lawyer, the inheritance letter, the betrayal. She listened without interrupting. By the time I finished, tears filled her eyes. "Oh, Victor, I'm so sorry." Then I said something she never expected. "I want to leave this house to you." Her coffee cup froze halfway to the table. "What?" "You heard me." She shook her head immediately. "No, I can't. I won't. Victor, that's your family home. It belongs to your children." I looked directly into her eyes. "No, it belongs to the people who valued the family inside it." The porch became completely silent. Grace stared at us as though we'd spoken another language. "You don't mean that." "I've never meant anything more." She looked toward Evelyn, surely expecting my wife to object. Instead, Evelyn smiled gently. You've cared for us like family for over a decade. Our children stopped acting like family a long time ago. Grace covered her mouth. Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. I never helped because I wanted anything. I know. That's exactly why you deserve it. Grace sat quietly for several minutes. Finally, she whispered the question that changed everything. If I accept, there's no coming back from this, is there? I slowly shook my head. No, there isn't. She looked down at her hands, then back at us. And although she hadn't spoken the word yet, I could already see the answer in her eyes. Grace didn't answer immediately. She stared out across the backyard, watching the old maple tree sway gently in the afternoon breeze. The same tree where Ryan had once built a crooked treehouse with my help. The same yard where Sophia had chased butterflies every summer. Finally, she looked back at us. I don't know if I deserve something this big. I smiled sadly. That's exactly why you do. She lowered her eyes. I've never helped you because I expected anything. I know. I would have kept helping even if you never mentioned this. I know that too. Evelyn reached across the table and gently took Grace's hand. Real family doesn't keep score. You proved that years ago. Tears filled Grace's eyes again. If I accept, I promise I'll honor every memory this house holds. For the first time in weeks, I felt peace. Not because I was getting revenge. Because I finally knew the home we'd spent 40 years building would belong to someone who actually loved what it represented. 3 days later, the three of us sat once again in Daniel Whitmore's conference room. Everything had already been prepared. The legal documents were stacked neatly in front of us. Every page marked. Every signature line highlighted. Daniel looked at Grace. I need to ask you one last time. Has anyone pressured you into accepting this gift? She immediately shook her head. No, he turned toward Evelyn and me. And has anyone pressured either of you into making this decision? No, this is entirely our choice. Daniel nodded. Good, he smiled faintly. That's exactly what I needed to hear. One by one, we signed. The scratching sound of each pen across paper echoed through the room. It was strangely quiet. No dramatic music, no shouting, no celebration, just ink, paper, and a decision that could never be undone. When the final signature dried, Daniel carefully gathered every document into a folder. Then he looked directly at me. It's finished. What does that mean? It means the Maple Ridge house legally belongs to Grace. I took a slow breath. So that's it? That's it. No loopholes? None, no challenges? I've spent 30 years preventing loopholes. He smiled. If your children hire the best attorney in the state, they'll still lose. Within 2 weeks, every transfer had been recorded. The deed changed. The ownership changed. The future changed. Evelyn and I moved into a comfortable one-story home across town. It wasn't nearly as large, but it was peaceful. No stairs, less maintenance, and surprisingly less emotional weight. Grace moved into our old home with tears in her eyes. She walked through every room as though entering a museum. She refused to repaint anything at first. I want to remember it the way you left it. That sentence alone told me we'd made the right decision. Nearly 2 months passed. Nothing happened. No phone calls, no angry messages, no surprise visits. Part of me wondered if Ryan had abandoned whatever plan he'd been making. Maybe Sophia had finally realized how deeply she'd hurt us. Maybe, just maybe, life would quietly move on. I couldn't have been more wrong. One cold Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. The screen displayed one word, Sophia. I stared at it for several seconds. She hadn't called since telling me to stay out of her life. Now, suddenly, she wanted to talk. I answered. Hello, Dad. Her voice sounded different. Not loving, not apologetic. Panicked. What happened to the house? I remained calm. What do you mean? Don't do that. I looked up the property records. It isn't in your name anymore. That's correct. You. She stopped herself. Then almost shouted. You gave our house away. I closed my eyes. No, I gave my house away. Silence, then she asked the question I'd been expecting for weeks. Who did you give it to? Grace, our old neighbor? Yes, you gave my childhood home to a stranger? I looked out the kitchen window. She stopped being a stranger years ago. Her breathing became heavier. You can't do this. I already did. Dad, that house belongs to Ryan and me. There it was. Not, how are you? Not, I'm sorry. Not, Can we fix this? Just ownership, entitlement, expectation. I spoke more calmly than I felt. Sophia, when was the last time you visited your mother? She didn't answer. When was the last time you called just to ask how we were doing? Silence. When was the last time you spent a Saturday helping me repair the porch? Nothing. But Grace did. Again, and again, and again. I gave the house to the person who treated us like family. Her voice cracked. You've destroyed this family. I smiled sadly. No, you and Ryan did that, the day you both decided your parents were worth less than your inheritance. She hung up without another word. I placed the phone on the counter. Evelyn looked at me. How'd it go? I exhaled slowly. They're finally realizing the house they were waiting for was never really theirs. Little did we know, that phone call was only the beginning. Because Ryan wasn't about to accept defeat. And unlike his sister, he wasn't planning to argue. He was planning to fight. Ryan called exactly 1 hour after Sophia hung up. Unlike his sister, he didn't sound emotional. He sounded prepared. Calculated, like a businessman walking into a negotiation he believed he could still win. Dad. Ryan. I heard about the house. I assumed you would. A long silence. Then he spoke carefully. I think we've all made some mistakes. I almost laughed. Mistakes? Yes, Sophia got emotional. You overreacted. And now we're all saying things we don't mean. I leaned back in my chair. Is that what you believe? I think we should sit down and talk. For old time's sake. I looked at Evelyn, who had been quietly listening from across the room. She slowly shook her head. She already knew what I was going to say. No, Ryan hesitated. What do you mean, no? I mean there's nothing left to discuss. Dad, you're throwing away 40 years of family history. No, I'm protecting it. His calm voice began to crack. You gave our childhood home to someone who isn't even related to us. That's true. Why? I answered without hesitation. Because she treated your mother and me like family. Silence, then. You did this to punish us. No, I did this because actions have consequences. You could have just talked to us. I closed my eyes for a moment. I tried. You told me to stop calling. That sentence ended the conversation. Ryan had no answer, only breathing. Heavy, uneasy. Finally he whispered. So that's it? Yes, you chose her over your own children. No, you chose to walk away from us. I simply accepted your decision. He hung up without saying goodbye. The next week was strangely quiet. Almost too quiet. Neither Sophia nor Ryan called again. No texts. No emails. Nothing. Daniel called instead. I expected this. What do you mean? They're regrouping. They'll probably convince themselves the transfer wasn't legal. You really think so? I've seen it happen dozens of times. When entitlement meets reality, people rarely accept reality first. 3 days later, Grace called. Her voice was shaking. Victor, what is it? They're here. Who? Sophia and Ryan. I stood immediately. What are they doing? They're standing on the front porch. They keep saying it's their house. They're demanding I unlock the door. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Exactly as Daniel predicted. Exactly as I'd feared. Listen to me. Lock every door. They're already locked. Good, don't open them. I'm calling the security company. Months earlier, when Grace moved into the house, I'd hired a residential security service. Not because I expected criminals. Because I expected family. A sentence I never imagined saying in my lifetime. Within minutes I reached Marcus Reed, the head of the company, and a retired sheriff's deputy. Marcus, Victor, I need your team. Problem? My children are trying to force their way into Grace's house. I understand. We're on our way. Evelyn was already putting on her coat. We're going too. I nodded. They deserve to hear this from us. 20 minutes later we pulled onto Maple Ridge Drive. The old house looked exactly the same. Fresh flowers lined the porch. The lawn was neatly trimmed. Grace had cared for it beautifully. Standing at the front steps were my children. Sophia was pounding on the door. Ryan stood beside her with folded arms, trying to look calm. Marcus's security team had already positioned themselves between them and the entrance. The moment Sophia saw my truck, she spun around. Dad. Her face burned with anger. Tell these people to move. I slowly walked toward them. No, they don't belong here. They work for the homeowner. This is our home. No, it was your childhood home. Now it's Grace's. Ryan stepped forward. You can't erase 40 years. I didn't. You did. Sophia's voice broke. We grew up here. I know. I taught you how to ride a bicycle in that driveway. I built your swing. I planted that maple tree. Then I looked directly into her eyes. And years later, you told me to stay out of your life. You don't get to reject your parents and still expect to inherit everything they built. Marcus stepped forward calmly. Ma'am. Sir, the homeowner has requested that you leave. If you remain on the property, we'll have no choice but to involve law enforcement. Sophia looked back at me in disbelief. You're calling security on your own children? I answered quietly. No, the homeowner is protecting her home, just like anyone else has the right to do. Ryan tried one last time. Dad, can we please just talk? For a fraction of a second, I remembered the little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after baseball practice. Then another memory replaced it. A lawyer's letter. A phone call telling me to disappear. Months of silence. I shook my head. We already had our conversation. You just weren't listening. Marcus nodded to his team. Without raising their voices, without touching either of them aggressively, they calmly escorted Sophia and Ryan down the front walkway. Sophia kept shouting, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." Ryan said nothing. His shoulders had slumped. For the first time, he realized the truth. There would be no inheritance, no negotiation, no second chance to claim what he had already counted as his. As they climbed into Ryan's SUV, I called out one final sentence. If your lawyer has any questions, Daniel Whitmore's office number hasn't changed. Ryan looked back once, then drove away. I watched the car disappear around the corner, and with it, the last illusion that blood alone makes a family. Grace opened the front door. Tears filled her eyes. I'm so sorry. I gently placed a hand on her shoulder. No, you didn't cause this. They did. The storm had finally passed. But one final chapter still remained. Because sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't watching people lose everything. It's watching them realize they threw it all away themselves. The weeks after Ryan and Sophia left the property were quieter than I'd expected. No more angry phone calls. No threatening letters. No surprise visits. Just silence. The same silence they had given Evelyn and me for years. Only this time, it didn't hurt anymore. Because silence stops being painful the moment you stop waiting for someone to break it. A month later, Daniel called. I thought you'd like to know. What happened? Ryan's attorney officially withdrew. So? It's over? Daniel chuckled. It was over the day you signed those papers. They finally realized they didn't have a case. What made them give up? The law. And the fact that every document was airtight. I smiled for what felt like the 100th time since this ordeal began. Not because my children had lost, but because justice had won. Life slowly settled into a peaceful rhythm. Our new home wasn't nearly as large as Maple Ridge, but it was filled with something the old house had been missing during its final years. Peace. Every Saturday morning, Grace stopped by with fresh muffins from the local bakery. Sometimes she brought flowers for Evelyn. Sometimes she simply came to drink coffee and talk. There were no hidden motives, no conversations about money, no awkward questions about wills or property. She treated us exactly the way she'd always treated us. With kindness. With respect. With genuine love. One afternoon, she surprised us with a framed photograph. It was an old picture she'd found while cleaning the attic. The four of us, Evelyn, me, Ryan, and Sophia, standing in front of the house nearly 30 years earlier. Everyone was smiling. Grace gently placed it on the mantel. These memories still belong to you. I stared at the photograph for a long time. Then I quietly replied, no, they belong to who we used to be. 3 months passed before I heard from Ryan again. Not through a lawyer. Not through Sophia. A handwritten letter arrived in the mail. His handwriting looked older somehow. Less confident. The envelope contained only 2 pages. The first sentence stopped me cold. Dad, I don't expect forgiveness. I kept reading. He admitted that he'd started thinking about the house years earlier. He confessed that he and Sophia had convinced themselves they were simply protecting their inheritance. Somehow, little by little, they had stopped seeing Evelyn and me as parents. Instead, they had started seeing us as assets. A house. Savings. Property. Future wealth. He wrote that losing the house had forced him to confront something far more painful. He hadn't lost an inheritance. He had lost his father. I folded the letter carefully. Evelyn looked at me. What did he say? I handed it to her. She read every word. By the time she reached the end, tears rolled gently down her cheeks. Do you think he means it? I honestly don't know. Will you answer? I looked out the window. The sun was setting beyond the trees, exactly like it had thousands of evenings before. Finally, I nodded. Yes, but not because of the house. Because people sometimes deserve the chance to become better. A week later, Ryan came alone. No lawyer. No demands. No arguments. He looked thinner. Older, the confidence he'd worn like armor was gone. He stood nervously on our front porch. When I opened the door, he didn't speak. He simply wrapped his arms around me. Something he hadn't done in over 20 years. I'm sorry, Dad. His voice cracked. I forgot what mattered. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then I gently hugged him back. I forgive you. His shoulders shook as he cried. But understand something. He nodded. I know. I can't undo what I did. No, you can't. And the house? I smiled softly. The house was never the lesson. You were. Sophia didn't come that day. Or the next. It took nearly 6 months before she gathered the courage to visit. Her apology was quieter. More fragile. There were tears. Long conversations. Painful truths. Healing didn't happen overnight. Some wounds never completely disappear. But forgiveness isn't pretending the past never happened. It's choosing not to let it control the future. Today, Grace still lives in the Maple Ridge house. She cares for it with the same love Evelyn and I once did. She invites us for Sunday dinners. Ryan sometimes joins us. Sophia has started coming again too. Not because she's waiting for another inheritance, because she's rebuilding a family she almost destroyed. The house never came back to them. And it never will. But something far more valuable did. Perspective, humility, and the understanding that parents are people, not stepping stones to wealth. As for me, I never wanted revenge fueled by hatred. I wanted a lesson that could never be forgotten. And in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't taking something away. It was allowing my children to discover, through their own choices, exactly what they had thrown away. If this story moved you, take a moment to think about the people who have always been there for you. Call your parents. Visit someone who loves you. Don't wait until regret is the only thing left. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. What do you think? Did Victor make the right decision? Or would you have given your children another chance? Until next time, remember this: respect is inherited through actions. Wealth is not.